Hi, everybody. This is David Manx with SailPoint, and welcome. For this SailPoint presentation, we have a special guest, LogMeIn, where they will discuss their identity governance vision using the power of AI and machine learning. Today, we have with us Kayla Williams, Director of GRC at LogMeIn, makers of LastPass, and Po Wang, Senior Manager, CIO, Portfolio Manager. Today, they'll share their identity journey of how AI and machine learning technologies are integral to their strategy, how the integration of systems and process changes were a significant part of their overall identity process, and the efficiencies that they gained with the cloud-first identity program. So I'm going to pass it over to them. One additional item, if you're looking for information on SailPoint after the session, you can go to the SailPoint website. There's an Identityverse virtual hub that can provide you a lot of great information, content, and videos. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kayla to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our session on LogMeIn's Identity Governance and Access Management Journey. As mentioned, I'm the Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance, and my team has helped to shepherd this program through all stages of the program management lifecycle, from the buy-in with our stakeholders straight through to the finishing of our Phase 1 initiatives. So I guess we can just kick off and get right into it. The agenda here will be for us just to talk about why IGA matters, which I'm assuming if you've been on this journey before, you understand the importance of having IGA. But if you haven't, we'll kind of touch upon that and go right into the pillars of a very strong IAM program. And then I'll pass it over to Po, and he will start to talk about our LogMeIn IGA program and really the accomplishments that we've made over the past several months as we've been going down this journey together. So why IAM matters? Well, as you know, there's a cost that goes with having a data breach in the United States. Roughly, the estimate now is the average cost is $3.86 million. Obviously, that's going to change depending on the size of your organization and the number of data points that have been breached, but an average of $3.86 million can put a small to medium-sized business out of business. So it's really important to make sure that you have a good process in place that manages your employee management lifecycle, all the way from a joiner of your organization straight through to that termination of that relationship. And how you can go through that process will be covered in the next few slides. So here we're going to get into the pillars of identity and access management. And what I'd like to point out here is everything on this left side of this slide that you see here. So identity data management, identity management, and access governance. This is what we're using SailPoint for today, and what we are working through building out in the next few phases of our project. Privileged access management up on the right-hand side, that's what LastPass is being used for across our company, and I would encourage you to look into using as part of a supplemental program to your SailPoint journey as well. And then we'll get into authentication, authorization, and directories, and data governance and protection. Towards the end, our program hasn't quite matured to reach that point yet, but we are going to be able to get through all of those key points here over the course of this program that Po is helping us manage.
Thank you very much, Kayla. So before we actually started with the program itself, we actually did a self-evaluation and understanding really the overall landscape of where we are given our current processes, right? And this is the most important program aspect of really getting the IAM program going, is understanding where our business processes lie, and more importantly, where our data process lies. A lot of people sort of overlook this and sort of feel like, hey, let's just get started and figure it out. Without this proper mapping, understanding how the overall landscape, as well as how these business processes interact with each other, and again, more importantly, the data interact with each other, it's very hard to then do a proper scoping, right? And laying the foundation for a solution like SailPoint, because SailPoint, and just like any other solution, is just as good as your ability to be able to implement it in the right way. And so what we did was we decided to take a step back and really understand how the infrastructure is at LMI, and then how do we change it going forward, and how those different pillars would come into play that Kayla offered up earlier. Okay, and so let me just walk into the program itself. Okay, so as a people, process, technology is usually the three key points as people talk about when you talk about from an information and technology change perspective, right? From the people perspective, we want to identify the right leadership that was basically going to have oversight and, more importantly, understand the deliverables in phase one. And then from a program management standpoint, that's where I came in to sort of really help the stakeholders, the executives understand what are we going to implement, working with Kayla and the GRC team to leverage that business knowledge in terms of their auditing experiences in the past few years, and then what were some of the pain points, and really converting that into business value. And how do we leverage IGA, SailPoint, and seeing the benefits and the amount of hours that we're going to save by implementing SailPoint. And so the first phase, what we basically looked at was, people say, hey, don't work in silos. But in this particular situation, it does make sense to work in silos because each of the different teams have different needs, right? As they have out-of-the-box connectors, as well as making custom connectors. And they're different maturity levels in terms of how the roles are identified and where are the roles documented, right? So we actually did treat them separately and be able to have 5 distinct work streams to be able to implement this in a way where again, it acknowledges the differences in each of them, but again, concentrating on each of those particular work streams and how they're working to sort of, again, get to the same goal of establishing a foundation between SailPoint and what our current processes is, right? Again, having the single source of truth between your HRIS system and AD. And that was really the crux of standing this up, is understanding the focus and the needs and the topics and the concerns while we're integrating our existing processes and making sure the source of truth really comes from those foundational systems into SailPoint. Because if you start integrating too soon and you're not having that clear delineation of what the source of truth is, you're always trying to balance between what you're doing with AD, or potentially if you use MIM, right, for group management and access, you're going to go back and forth and not really determining how the whole structure and, again, your foundation for IAM should be working, and the best way to leverage SailPoint and its flexibility into integrating with your HRR system as well as AD. Okay. And so from a mapping standpoint, we sort of outlaid the visual Gantt chart of what were the key milestones and deliverables when we sort of focus, and what was the business process of engaging GRC, because as mentioned earlier, they are sort of the SPs in this area and really providing the guardrails of how to implement the system correctly, where we meet our compliance needs and ensure that we are leveraging the system to its best ability, and more importantly, getting off that spreadsheet of really doing access controls based on that, and really saving a lot of time for doing reviews and recertifications. Okay, and then as you can see from an HRIS standpoint, as well as proprietary applications, really laying the foundation was the first structure that we decided to move forward with. Again, without identifying that, it would be very difficult to start onboarding applications, because then everything will get tied into the applications, and then we can actually start testing and making sure that there's one central place for identity, security groups, and so forth, right? And so that's how we sort of mapped out phase 1, and then 1.1 we started the onboarding of applications. Okay, and that's going to really deal with how you are going to connect with SailPoint and how the service accounts are going to come in place, and then the type of roles that people are looking at, and how do we define that, and really clean up some of the legacy information and processes that reside in your respected organizations. Okay. And so what are the lessons learned, right? And I think this is the important part as we sort of finished phase one in a good amount of time. Even our one of SailPoint's preferred vendors were quite surprised how quickly we were able to implement this and how successfully, right? But yet there's still lessons learned that we're going to carry on to phase two. As I mentioned earlier, when we start with a document of the business process, it's really quite important that you understand it, really, and discover all the systems there, right? And as a PM, my responsibility is to really understand, from working with the GRC, really understand the compliance needs. But more importantly, SailPoint University has a lot of videos that one can really understand the basic information that SailPoint, in terms of access management, can really help me as a PM leverage with the SMEs, the preferred vendors, as well as our system owners, right? Without that knowledge, I don't think I would have been very successful in this, right? And it would take a lot more cycles to really help the teams converge on certain points that we need to cover to best leverage SailPoint. And then more importantly, our partners who actually didn't quite understand access management, they were able to take a look at those videos as well and learn what SailPoint can do and what access management's all about. So that would be one thing that I would really encourage, right? Really discovering the system integration requirements, because from those videos, they understood it externally, but internally, I had to understand that as well. And really understand the proposed process and integration, right? Without diagramming that out, you're not going to really help have a complete roadmap and really shorten the implementation cycle, because a lot of people then would be talking versus looking at documentation and a roadmap that you're able to propose. Stakeholder management, extremely important, right? Communicate. I think what happens a lot of times, people, when you're working with that silo type of structure, the teams don't understand what each other is doing. And so that's where I worked with the GRC and KLS team to really communicate the importance of this and how their system integration plays in a bigger role of what's going to change in their process of automated access management and provisioning, right? And I think that's the biggest part, is really beating that drum, and then also really connecting with that infrastructure for program management of the stakeholders, and making sure that they drill that down with their teams, as well as the managers, the owners of the applications, and their respected teams, right? And they have to be really communicative and believe in the process as well, and be transparent, right? Not everything did go as planned, and no program ever does. But at the end of the day, when you're transparent, you can come up with a solution, right? We had to integrate with some existing processes that we had. There were a lot of challenges. So what we did was we reached out to our preferred vendor, but more importantly, to SailPoint Expert Services as well, because they really, at the back end, really will know what some of the processes that we can augment and some of the code changes that we have to make as they're going to deploy it. And being in a cloud solution, that really made the starting phase one quite easy, right? We didn't have to sort of build out all these servers and start installing some enterprise application. Everything was there for us to start on day one and start playing with it with our preferred services and our SMEs, okay? And then focus on phases, okay? This is not a big bang project, and I think this is where a lot of implementations of any type of solutions, especially something as difficult as SailPoint, will fail, right? Because you're trying to take in everything versus really understanding, how do I set up the foundation? Because just like building a house, if you have a bad foundation, the house is going to have cracks in it. And what we decided to do was take a look at it from a phased approach, right? We wanted to make sure the foundation was good, and then start onboarding the highest risk applications that we see as an organization, and really test and true that with the overall process, because then this will dictate a lot easier onboarding for less risky applications, right? And then the buy-in will be a lot higher as well from the overall organization. Okay, and what were some of the project management setbacks, right? When you're not having a clear RACI, right? Roles, accountability, contribution, and informed, right? Who is really the roles and who's responsible for what? We actually clearly define that up front of who owns the application and what their roles are and who's going to support it, right? How do you make that transition from development into production and who's responsible for that, right? That actually took a lot of time. But again, this is where our CSM really came into play and really helped us understand what their roles are. And they really helped us a lot in terms of support. Again, having that right documentation there on the SailPoint side and be able to point our team that who's going to support some of the generic questions. And they also had generic manuals of, okay, how do you provide access? How do you take away access? What happens when you get an access request, right? All those documents were there. We didn't have to create any of that, which actually made things a lot easier when it came sort of to a RACI agreement, because we didn't really need to create that. We actually just pointed the persons who's responsible for supporting the application going forward, right? And then moving the cheese is something that we all sort of deal with on an organizational level, right? And that was, again, one of the things that we had to overcome, but to really show them the benefits of manual process versus an automated process. And that was some of the things that really having that program structure that I went over earlier really helps with that, because once executives understand, it's a lot easier for them to cascade it down through the organization. But really paint it in a way that we're not trying to change a process, we're trying to improve their process, right? And that's where you know, that term moving their cheese, because everyone wants to do something comfortable that they're used to, because they don't know if it's harder, if it's easier, and usually people always think it's harder to learn something new. And again, having gone through scheduling trainings with stakeholders and owners, it became quite apparent that that the old way was a lot harder, and people were going to save a lot more time with the implemented solution. Okay, and focusing on scope and MVP. I can't stress this enough, how important it is to really focus on the minimal viable product, and more importantly on the phases, right? Because that gives people milestones to hit, but also it's something obtainable, right? Our goal wasn't saying, okay, we're going to onboard 10 applications and we're going to pick them on once we build the foundation, right? We had all the teams rowing together. We had weekly status updates, and we sort of had executive updates on a monthly basis. So it sort of kept everybody informed and focusing on the scope. And we weren't going to onboard any new applications. There were people who wanted to do it for sure, just because they saw the light at the end of the tunnel being a lot better than what they're doing today. But as a PM, I wanted the team to focus for that overall win for the company, and to really continue the momentum into phase 2. Okay, and then the delineation between development and production, right? Right now we're faced out with today is like, okay, when do we use professional services from SailPoint, and when do we not, right? And then what type of services are they going to provide for us, and when should our team be asking them questions? And so those are all sort of things that we have to clearly identify for our SMEs to be able to interact with them, and then be able to clearly define what are we implementing and what are we supporting. And with those, I think it's going to be quite successful in phase 2.
So here, AI and ML, everybody loves talking about these words here. You know, having AI in place is and machine learning is going to be huge for us. As I mentioned previously, having a tool that can learn from what it's experiencing and creating new roles will help my team and the application owners through the creation of those new roles, and not having to do it on their own. It's going to automatically recognize the need, and it's going to create it for us, and we'll have that system of record in place. But another huge benefit to having AI and machine learning is segregation of duties, alerting. This is huge. when you have financial systems or even systems in a software development lifecycle where you should have proper segregation between roles and different types of accesses, if AI can learn and identify anomalies, it can flag them down and let you know, and you can then take the appropriate action to address it, or not, as long as you're transparent and you have your risk management process in place. You say, we have to have this and document it, that's good, but the system can tell you that, and that transparency enables management to make better decisions around the existing things that the processes that are in place and the procedures to address them. AI data holds insights, and people and AI coming together. You can't just rely on a system to do something for you. Someone always has to be involved. The people versus AI is a big controversy, but in my opinion, the system will give you the information, and how we judge that information and what we decide to do with it is totally up to us. And the system's going to identify something that we may miss. If you're reading something for, when you're like reading a book and you're just reading it for so long and you're staring at the information and you're missing that there's like a word that's the duplicate the, or there's a word that's missing and your brain just skips it. That's exactly what happens when you're staring at data for too long. So AI can pick up on those anomalies and bring that to your attention, and then you're better informed to make a decision. And that is huge when we talk about risk management. Transparency and the ability to make a better informed decision is always going to help the business from an awareness perspective. Now, for us, we have a steering committee in place for security and privacy, and what we want to be able to provide them with is the metrics here that you see. I put some examples down because a lot of times people ask, oh, what are you measuring and why are you measuring it? The AI will flag for us risky users, right? If there's an anomaly through someone's access, or there's a heightened access that is kind of questionable but doesn't quite cross that segregation of duties boundary, it's going to flag that for us, and we can report on that to management and let them know what actions are being taken. Is that within our risk tolerance? Are we okay with people having certain access abilities for certain amounts of time based on the roles that they have? Letting management know if there's segregation of duties violations. Ideally, that would be 0. There should be no appetite for that, but it may happen. Number of access outliers, by business unit or functional department. Number of access recertification campaigns that have been completed or haven't been completed on time, which runs a risk from a compliance perspective. If someone's just not doing it, why aren't they doing it? And is that now going to be a potential issue when we get audited later on? And then average time to terminate access. Most corporations have a policy, within 24 hours of someone leaving. Well, a system like SailPoint can do it within minutes. So if your system's in place, that average time should not be disrupted. It should be very consistent. If there's something that happens and there's a breakdown between Workday or your system of record and then AD and SailPoint, then you might start to see an issue and know you have to address something. So these are just kind of some of the things that we are looking to use to report to executive management. And that will change, of course, as we go through this. We might identify other things to report on, but this is really the baseline of where we felt we could provide some valuable information and insight to our steering committee and management team.
And can I also add, Kayla, right? This is when we were sort of doing a proposal, an RFP. This was one of the big reasons why we actually went with SailPoint. I think the executives are quite enthusiastic about it, and so we're looking very forward to implementing this in phase 2 and come back and report right to SailPoint and its customers how it's going. I think this would be a nice lift for us and be able to really leverage the AI ML aspect that SailPoint has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely, Poe. It's huge, and we have other systems from a GRC perspective where we're managing our risk registers, our control environment, and SailPoint is actually a control for our access management. It's a mitigating control that we have, and it's already starting to tick boxes from a compliance perspective, and it's just making our residual risk profile look much better as we roll it out. And then that's solely down to having the automation put in place. And then here, this is just a fun little graphic around, as I was mentioning, around the human judgment when people come into play. We got big data, you got AI, it's going to give you information, but you really need the human aspect, the human judgment to really come in and tell you what business decision needs to be made based on the information being provided back from SailPoint from the AI and ML perspective. And that wraps it up for us.
Great. Poe, Kayla, thank you so much for that great information and walking us through your identity journey.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting us. We had a great time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David.